Doing? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
This is Kathleen with Bright Futures.
Oh, hi, Kathleen. Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. All right. And so, all right, I guess it's about time to get started. So once again, this is Sarah Robb with ECCLA. Thanks for joining this afternoon. Can everybody see my screen? Can somebody see my screen? Okay, got some people chatting in. Yes, thank you. All right, and so just to let you know, also this session is being recorded so that I can post it online afterwards, and anybody who couldn't make it can check it out later. And any of you that maybe if you wanted to listen to some of it again, you can check it out later as well. So with that out of the way, I think let's just dive right in and get started. So on this call today, we're going to talk about the 2015 and 2016 fiscal year funding applications for providers to apply for funding for the CDHS administered funding streams. And just a second, we'll be specific about which ones those are. And so I also wanted to touch on, though, before we really jump in, on a couple of things that this session is not. So first of all, what we're not going to do this afternoon is be able to get into conversations or cover anything about your budgets or contracts. Either anything that is maybe being subcontracted or will be subcontracted with ECCLA or with the Denver Council or with the state or any of those things. That's not what we're going to be able to cover this afternoon on this call. And this is not a sugar training. So this is kind of more of an overview about functionality and logistics, and we're going to get into sugar trainings very soon, but not on this call today. Are there any questions so far on any of that? All right, well, that's easy. Okay, so this you've already seen because it was on the meeting invite as well, but just to recap, here are the topics that for us to talk about today, and then of course jump in either on the phone or on the chat window, in the GoToMeeting window with any questions as we go along. So what I've got on our agenda today is we're going to talk about which of your providers will be able to go online through Colorado Shines and apply for which funding programs. We'll talk about how the sugar database is going to know who can apply for which funding programs. And we're going to talk about what that's going to look like from the provider's perspective. We're just going to look really quickly at that. I know that's a demo that you all have seen some more. And as we get more and more into the trainings, you're going to see it a lot more. So, but we will just take a quick look at that. Then we're going to look at how will the quality improvement funds and coaching hours, so the quality improvement assets kind of collectively, be assigned or allocated to the providers, and who is going to decide which providers are going to be awarded funds or coaching hours, just who will be awarded those resources. That will be councils, by the way, but we'll go over that. And then after the application and review and selection process, the next step is going to be the MOUs, which presumably is how most of you are used to doing your quality improvement process already. But as we go through this, if any of this differs from the way you've been doing it, please jump in and let me know. And then we're going to finish up with a couple of important dates that are coming up, and some immediate next steps. And one other thing that is a very, very big issue and very, very important, but we're not going to talk about today, is the topics of spending. So logging coaching hours or recording spending or any of that. Today we're gonna stick just to the process of providers applying for funds and being awarded those funds, and then kind of signing the MOUs. And the rest of the actual how they actually spend those funds once the MOUs are signed is a really big topic that we will tackle another day. Anything from anybody so far? All right. So what we have for the funding streams that we're talking about today are the CDHS administered funding streams, and those are the ones that are going to have applications handled through Colorado Shines and EC Connect. And so that's the Race to the Top Quality Improvement Dollars, School Readiness, Infant Toddler, and the CCAP QI funding. So can I have people say or chat in which of these you have, you're going to be having for this upcoming, I guess now current fiscal year? Right. Oh, there's some. Okay. Okay, I'm seeing several Race to the Top and ITQAs, and some Race to the Top. Anybody else? Oh, some more. Okay, great. All right. So the first kind of step that I thought we would talk about in this process, the flow from providers being able to apply online through getting those funds awarded. The first step is obviously whether or not they can even see the application. And the Colorado Shines website, the Salesforce database, and the Sugar database kind of collectively are going to be determining whether or not a provider, when they're logged into Colorado Shines, can see this each funding application, and it's going to control that whether they can see it or not based on whether they're eligible. So to start with, these are the eligibility rules that we have by each funding stream. So what we have is for Race to the Top QI, any licensed provider that has achieved level 2 or greater is going to be eligible to apply. I also want to be clear that that they're going to get funding. It doesn't mean that you have to fund them or that the funding is guaranteed or assigned or anything. It just means that they have access to, if a licensed provider is level 2 or higher and they go online to the website, to the page in Colorado Shines where the funding application is, they'll be able to see the Race to the Top QI application, and they'll be able to fill it out and submit it, and that'll go to you, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is going to look like, again, in terms of kind of concept and logistics. So, but that's who will be able to see and work on and submit that funding application. For school readiness, we've got a list of providers based on of course, the geographic areas from CDHS, so licensed providers who are designated as school readiness eligible. For ITQA, that is going to be any licensed provider that is authorized to serve infants and or toddlers. And then for the CCAP QI program, that is going to be providers that have, I think we say we don't have folks on the call today that are on that in that program. Oh, I see Danielle's here. Danielle has a couple. So that is providers with a mean CCAP enrollment of 3 or more, and those providers must be within the designated council areas for the CCAP QI program. So that is going to be the 9 pilot councils from the 2014 to 2015 fiscal year, and then 7 new councils that are coming in on the 2015 to 2016 fiscal year. And that was based on having, I want to say, like 3 or more providers in your council area that met this qualification. So 3 or more providers, each of whom had a mean CCAP enrollment of 3 or more was the qualification for that. Does that make sense to everybody before I go to the next slide? Or does anybody have any comments on it? Yeah.
Sarah, this is Sandy Gregory, and under the ITQA, you say any licensed provider that is authorized to serve infants and toddlers. I was thinking they needed to be part of the ITQA program. Is that true, or is it just any licensed provider that serves infants and toddlers?
Well, I am not sure that. Okay, so I'm not 100% sure I'm understanding your question, but let me try to answer what. Would it make sense if by applying for and being approved for this funding, then the provider became part of the ITQA program?
Is anybody else on the call that there was an infant toddler pilot project of which I'm not a part of, and I was thinking that you would have to be part of that in order to qualify for monies there. That's the question I'm asking.
I'm not aware of an ITQA pilot. Does anybody else know? I know a handful of you said that you have ITQA funding.
Sarah, this is Danielle. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, ITQA is it's actually all of that and above. You have to be eligible. You have to be a CCAP provider providing care for infants and toddlers, and then your council will have some sort of application process to be a part of that project.
Right.
It's both.
This is Lucinda. You know, several years ago we applied for the infant toddler QA funding, and I don't know that it's been opened up to new councils since that time.
All right, so there may be councils. Okay, I actually did not have that, and I'm not sure the sugar database does either, so that is a really good question then. So what I am hearing is that, that some councils may not be participating in ITQA, even though there may be eligible providers in their area. Is that right?
Yeah, Sarah, that's correct.
All right, I'm making a note really quick. Hold on just a moment.
Sarah, while you're making that note as well, Boulder has not been approached to get back into the CCAP QI project as well. So we've only received contracts for Race to the Top QI and for renewing ITQA.
Okay.
But that's probably a longer private discussion at another time.
Okay. Yeah, let's you and I talk about that soon and figure out what's going on with that. All right. And so actually, as I was making my previous note, I realized I think we are prepared. So sorry, I scared myself. I think we are prepared for the situation you were talking about, because the way we're going to be setting up Sugar and EC Connect, that we're actually in the next few days here, is we're going to be setting up each of these one funding stream in Sugar per one of these funding streams per council. So those of you who have, say, Race to the Top and ITQA, your council will have two funding streams in Sugar, one for Race to the Top and one for ITQA. And so we'll also, of course, we'll have a list of, I think we do, I just haven't looked at it in a while, of which councils have which of these funding streams. So we just wouldn't set that up at all for those councils that don't participate in ITQA. Sorry, that is absolutely the way that it is set up. Sorry. Thank you, though, and I'll just make sure that I get that official list before I just set up ITQA for like everybody. Okay, so thanks. I'm going to go to the next section now. So the next few slides, I want to just show you in a little bit more detail in terms of the database, how the Sugar database knows who's eligible. So on the previous slide, we looked at kind of the real-world version of who is eligible. And so on these, I'm going to show you an example. And I know a lot of you have seen Sugar very, very little so far. And actually, I'll point out that what we're working on, we've been working on for several weeks now and are going to be wrapping up next week, is an upgrade from Sugar version 6.5 to version 7. And the reason I'm sharing that is because Sugar 7, once we have that up and running next week, is going to look a little bit different. So not hugely different, but somewhat different. So what you see right here is a screenshot from Sugar. And I just wanted to give you a heads up that when you get online with Sugar very, very soon, it's going to look slightly different from this. So, but what this is a screenshot of an account. This happens to be a fake kind of test account we have set up in the Sugar database so that we can test all these different funding applications and things. And on this Boulder Preschool Test account, the orange circle here is circling where it shows the Colorado Shines level that this site supposedly is. So in this example, this program would not be able to apply for the Race to the Top QI because they're not level 2 or higher. But that's where Sugar is getting the information. Based on the value that Sugar has, it decides whether or not to show this provider that application. In a couple minutes, we're going to look at what that looks like when they are shown the application. So for school readiness, there is a field that we've imported into Sugar that is based on that list from CDHS. So that's populated. That's the field there that's circled, which is just the SRQIP eligibility. Very straightforward. And so the Sugar database just looks at that and says, I'm going to show the application for school readiness to this site, to this provider, or I am not going to show it, and it's just going to be invisible. All right, this next one, I think we're getting some clarification on last minute from CDHS, but for ITQA, it's going to be showing the application to licensed providers that are authorized to serve infants and toddlers. Now, I did just hear from some councils yesterday on a call similar to this one that that typically ITQA is available only to CCAP providers that serve infants and toddlers. But I have heard from the Denver Council that they received at some point in the past permission to make available for ITQA to providers, even if they didn't serve CCAP children yet, with the understanding that part of that funding would be to add CCAP slots to serve infants and toddlers. So the plan at this time is to base that application on base the availability of the application, so whether the provider can even see the application or not, on whether they're licensed to serve infants and toddlers. But we'll also collect their, of course, their figures on the CCAP slots, the infant toddler CCAP slots. And then later on in the application process, you would award funds or eliminate somebody from consideration based on the existing CCAP slots, if that's how you handle this. Does that make sense?
Sarah, where are you getting that list of providers?
So the school readiness list of providers
No, for
is
the
we're getting from
infant
CDHS.
Right.
So it's not a list. Well, so what this is here, and oh, I forgot to fix this. This orange circle is circling the wrong field. It should be the youngest age authorized to serve right above that it should be circling. This is, so I mean, I guess the list is in Salesforce, that's in Colorado Shines QRS, and that is all the licensed providers. So when they log into Colorado Shines, Salesforce, and because Salesforce talks to the Sugar database, both those databases know all this information about them. So,
for example, in our council community, not all of the providers who serve infants and toddlers participate in ITQA, and that's by the council's choice because because of our limited funding, we prioritize certain areas.
Absolutely. And so that's what I was talking about with what we're talking about here is just the basic eligibility criteria, which governs whether or not this provider can even see the application when they're logged into the Colorado Shines website, so whether they can apply for this funding or not. There's still the process which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, where then your council will get these applications, and then we'll also talk about how you could steer providers to those applications kind of preemptively. But ultimately, anybody who does apply, you would get those applications and award funds or not, based on your review process or whatever you do.
But we can't steer them away from the application preemptively?
That is correct. So I will show you a little bit more about how they would get to it, though, and that might help. But let's do this one and then the next slide, and then I think we can talk a little bit more about that. So this one, as I mentioned, this orange circle I should have fixed, but really it's going by the youngest age authorized to serve. And in this case right now it is pulling from Colorado Shines, which unfortunately is going to be a self-reported field. So we are checking with the state to find out if we can get the field from licensing data, so we can just get whether they're authorized to serve according to licensing and not according to what they put in on this page. All right, and then finally for the CCAP QI pilot, again, it's going to be providers in designated council areas, just like with the other ones, as you all pointed out. Thanks. And then with, as long as they have a mean CCAP enrollment of 3 or more. And so this is, once again, this is a screenshot from Sugar. This is looking at the Boulder preschool test account again, and there's a field there that says mean CCAP enrollment. So when the Sugar database is deciding, again, whether to show an application to a provider or not, it looks at that number and says, is this greater than or equal to 3? And if so, then it lets them see the application and fill it out.
Sarah, this is Danielle. Back to ITQA, I've just been sitting here thinking about it. I think we might have to do a little bit more talking about that, because of the 12 or so councils, 11 or 12, that are contracted to deliver ITQA services, we probably each have a slightly different recruitment process. So I don't think it's exactly the same as Race to the Top or some of the other programs that actually, you know, you can do a filter from Colorado Shines and figure out who might be eligible. So we might need to just talk about that just a little bit more. I would hate to have certain people in my community see that they might be eligible, but actually they're really not.
Okay.
So,
yeah, so let me show, and you have seen this page pretty recently, but yeah, let me explain this page quickly to everyone, and then I would like to hear a little bit more about that process for you all. So, but yeah, so what we're on now is what providers will see when they're applying for funding. So this is a really, really quick snapshot. The actual funding application and the pieces of it are obviously a little more complex than just this one screenshot. But to get the idea across, what we're looking at here is obviously a Colorado Shines website screenshot, and I don't think you can see my mouse, but what the provider has done or would need to do is go, so there's this kind of brown taupe colored menu bar that starts with home, has application where they put in most of their information for their initial, all of their information for their initial Colorado Shines application. It's got the tab for levels 1 and 2. It's got the tabs for levels 3 to 5, and then it's got this quality improvement tab. So they would need to go to this quality improvement tab. Once they hit that, the first thing they get to is a screen called Build My QIP, and that's where they can create their quality improvement plan. If they've got a coach, often they would work with their coach to create their quality improvement plan. And the other tab under quality improvement here is QI incentives, and this is the one that, whoops, I hit the scroll button on my mouse. Sorry. Okay. So this is that tab that I think you've all seen in at least a few demos here and there. But it is a window into the ECConnect site, so which is the one that's tied to the sugar database. So once they go to this quality improvement tab and then the QI incentives tab, that's where they get to the funding applications. And so, and then from there, based on the data that is in the databases, the Salesforce database and also the Sugar database about them, that controls what applications they can see. And in this screenshot, we can see just one kind of at the top of the list that Boulder Preschool Test has already started applying for, but the applications that are available to them will show up here. And then we've got, what we also have is a kind of a reference list below that, which describes all of the statewide funding source streams, so all the 4 that I've described anyway. So then the idea being that some providers may not be currently eligible for all of those, but they might be able to become eligible by choice. For example, if they saw that there was an opportunity for Race to the Top QI funding, but that it was restricted to sites that were level 2, maybe they would want to become a level 2 so they could apply for that funding. So with that kind of thing in mind, we have kind of, the website shows them which funding they can apply for, and then below that, kind of for reference, it shows them a list of all the funding that they may be able to apply for, and just kind of general descriptions of what the guidelines are for those. So now I want to take a minute, and so Danielle, will you tell me a little bit more about what your process is for determining who can apply for ITQA? Hello, Danielle?
Sarah, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Oh, can you tell me more now about your the process that you all use for determining who can apply for ITQA?
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll figure out who are the CCAP providers who are caring for infants and toddlers in the community, and we will release in end of July, August, we'll release an application form, paper copy to all of them, and encourage them all to apply. And then, like Lucinda said, because we have limited funds, we can only choose like 20 classrooms to really work with intensively, when actually we probably have 50, 60 classrooms we could work with. But we'll choose those 20, we'll work with those directors and invite them to participate. And once they've agreed to participate, then we have an MOU that's signed with the county, and then we work with that smaller group. So there might be...
How do you decide who gets applications?
Everyone gets an invitation to apply. So if you're a provider, as long as you're a provider who's caring for CCAP children. So if you have an active fiscal agreement with our CCAP program and you care for infants and toddlers, you'll receive an invitation to apply. And say that's, I don't know, 50, 60, 100 providers, family homes and centers. Actually, I think we're just working with centers now because family homes we tripped up a little bit on. But and then out of that, we only end up working with like 15 or 16 programs.
Okay. So actually what you're describing is exactly what the system is set up to do. It just does it online. So what this has is providers who go into Colorado Shines, which anybody that you wanted to invite to apply for your ITQA funding for this year, you would make sure they go to Colorado Shines, make sure they fill out that application on the applications tab. So their initial, that's the part with workforce and classrooms and those sections that they need to fill out. And then when they're ready, they would go to this quality improvement tab, go to QI incentives, and do their ITQA application there. And then that goes to you. And then you do whatever your review process is. You decide who you're awarding funds to and who not. And then within Sugar, you kind of activate those funds for the sites that are going to be receiving funds, and you're going to be working with them.
In our region, we limit eligibility to certain towns.
Who's that?
This is Lucinda. In our region, we limit eligibility to certain towns.
Ah.
So I think given this system, we'll have to open it up, but then just tell people they aren't really eligible.
Okay.
Which is, I mean, it's sort of an unfortunate scenario.
So
we're small.
How is it structured, or I guess why is it limited to certain towns? How are those towns chosen?
Well, we don't have enough funding to serve everybody that would potentially be eligible that serves CCAP children, so we limited it to the towns that have sort of the greatest need and the least access to other funding supports.
Okay. All right. And so, but another, I hope is a potential upside. So I guess you're all going to be having race to the top funding available. But for anyone who, it sounds like a lot of you work to invite providers to apply for funding, and so I also want to point out that that is essentially the same as what this process is as well. If you've got providers in your area that have already made their way onto the Colorado Shines website, have filled out their application, and have, and starting next week, find this quality improvement tab and the QI incentives section and apply for funding there, then okay, in that case you're not really inviting them to apply. But assuming that most of them are going to need some support from you to get there, then providing that support and doing that outreach is your invitation to apply. So I know for some of these funding streams, well, I don't know, I believe that for at least some of these, CDHS is very hopeful that everybody, all providers who are eligible, will be kind of invited to apply and encouraged and supported in getting to this point. But certainly for those funding streams that are more limited, this is the same or a pretty similar process to what I think some of you are describing, except for Lucinda with your limiting it to certain towns. That does get tricky. I have a note of that so far.
We're small enough, Sarah, that we'll just deal with it locally. It's okay.
All right.
Sarah, can you refresh my understanding of how much work a provider would have to do to be at this stage to be able to see that they might want to apply for ITQA? So if I were to put out a notice saying, ITQA funding available now on Colorado Shines, what all do they have to have done? Just refresh my memory or understanding what they have to have done.
All right. So I am logging into Salesforce. You can see my screen. So this is, of course, this is not the part that a provider would do. This is the part for councils who have who are supporting providers with Colorado Shines. And you would have your Salesforce login. If you don't already, please request one. I sent you the link for the form to request Salesforce logins. And then this is in the email I just sent yesterday or today, the To Dashboard button that I talked about, which lets me go to Colorado Shines logged in as this provider. In this case, again, I'm using a test provider because I don't want to use a real one. So this is a fake made-up one that's in the database. And so the main piece, so this page starts out on the home screen, and it's great if they fill out their profile section for the funding application. And we're getting a little technical here, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this. We'll do more trainings on this later. But it's great if they fill out their contact information, the information about their director. But the meat of what they need to do before they can apply for any funding is this application, and it has 5 sections. And so here's where they fill out their program profile, their schedule, accreditation, a couple other things, cultural, linguistic, health promotion. Then their in section, and that's just children and ages. The workforce is the part that interfaces with PDIS, and I believe they'll have time after. I believe they can skip this and still apply for funding as long as they're continuing to work to get their staff into PDIS. And then classrooms definitely need the information on their classroom, so they need to add each classroom. And that's going to be important, not least of all, because if they do qualify for funding, then Sugar is going to do some calculations and come up with, which we'll talk about in the very next slide. It's going to calculate their preliminary funding. And it's going to, in some cases, in a lot of cases, base that on the number of classrooms they have. So they definitely need to make sure this is complete. And then the high needs section. And so these are the big pieces that they would need to get finished. If it's not finished, then when they go to the Quality Improvement tab, and then there's the QIP, Quality and QI Incentives. This is the screen that takes a little while because this is where the 2 databases are talking to each other and exchanging a whole bunch of that information. What this should do is tell me that I can't apply for funding because I haven't finished my Colorado Shines application, because the application I was just showing you was incomplete. Go back. So it's missing the program profile section and also workforce. So that is that's pretty quick, the work they need to do before they can apply for funding.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right. And so this is just, this is actually what I was just saying a second ago. I got ahead of myself a little bit. But so what happens once a provider applies for funding, as I mentioned, the application is saved in Sugar. So Sugar has their funding application. It's got the answers to all the questions that they've filled out. And once they submit, they say, I'm done, and they submit that funding application, Sugar lets you all know that you've got a new funding application in. And it calculates some preliminary assets, and those are based on the asset formulas that I think you've all seen the spreadsheet of. It's the one with the 2 scenarios, and it has, if they're applying for Race to the Top at the same time as some of those other types of funding, or if they're applying for the 2 separately, so they're applying for, say, ITQA, prior to being able to apply for Race to the Top. So, but that according to the formulas on that spreadsheet, Sugar is going to calculate the QI dollars that they would be assigned, that they would potentially be assigned, and it's going to calculate the coaching hours that they would potentially be assigned. And then both of those, the dollars and hours that Sugar has done some math and calculated, are saved in the database, and they're set as preliminary. So nobody can start spending or coaching or anything like that, but the figures are in there, and you can check those out, and that'll be part of your review process, but you'll have access to be able to see those numbers. So that's the step of the calculations that Sugar does on those assets, the preliminary calculations. And again, that's in that spreadsheet that you have. And then what we have here is, we've talked about a few times already, but just the point that, that sugar is not awarding any funds. So I know that's a question that I've heard a few different times in a few different ways. Yeah, sugar's not awarding funds to providers. You're still deciding, you're reviewing, you're deciding who will be awarded funding. If you've got limited funds and more providers than you can support, then your review process still goes the way your review process goes. And then I think some key differences are that what you would use to review, you would pull out of sugar. And there's any number of ways we can do that. You can print screens or run reports or exports or all sorts of things. So to get the information out of sugar from those applications, the funding applications. And then once you've decided who's getting funds, you applications in sugar, and you would just update them. So once the applications are submitted, they show up in sugar that they've been submitted. And then once you decide that somebody's application is approved, it's accepted, that you're going to be moving ahead with them in that program, you would just change the application in sugar so it says accepted. And that triggers a bunch of things in sugar to actually help you start working with them. Like it takes their assets, their dollars, and their coaching hours and makes them active instead of preliminary, for example. Additionally, any applications that you are not going to be able to approve, you would set to rejected. And then, yeah, then there's from that point there's a lot else you can do, but that is definitely starting to get into the category of things we don't have time to cover today, but just through the kind of the application stage. Oh, but I did misspeak a little bit because when I said that you would decide who is getting funded and make it accepted, that wasn't quite right. What you would do once you decide who is whose application is accepted and who will be awarded funds is you would go into sugar and set it to send the MOU to the provider. So what we're going to have, it's not quite yet, we're working full tilt to get all the applications online by next week. And then the next big priority is to get all the MOUs online. But the MOUs, Sugar can send MOUs out for electronic signature. So with the MOUs set up, and then you can trigger in Sugar, you would go in and trigger that email to go to the provider with the MOU that they would sign, and then it would go to you all to countersign, etc. And so what we're going to do to prepare for that in the very near future is have you all review the MOU templates just to make sure that the MOU that you are going to be signing along with your providers for funding is in fact going to be something that's going to work for you. I'm going to get those, we're going to get those set up in Sugar, and then once those are ready to go, then you will be able to, and then you'll get trained on it. What I just said just now is not your training on sending MOUs. We will get you trained on how to do the things I just described, so how to go into Sugar and trigger the sending of those MOUs. And then once the MOUs are fully executed, then those assets, the quality improvement dollars and the coaching hours, at that point they become active. So that's the part I misspoke about a few minutes ago. Questions on this? I'm sure there's questions on this. All right, I don't believe you that you don't have questions, but I'm going to assume it's getting later and later on Friday afternoon, and you're a little bit surprised into silence. I think I just gave a whole bunch of information really quickly. All right, so we're getting toward the end. Just a couple of really quick deadlines. So one deadline that is an ECCLA deadline is July 15th. That is, I believe, next Wednesday is when we expect to have these online funding applications open. So they'll be active. Right now, well, I was just showing you on the Colorado Shines website, in that example that I showed a few minutes ago, I went to the funding application under the QI Incentives tab, and it complains that I hadn't finished my Colorado Shines application. If I had finished my Colorado Shines application, it still wouldn't have let me apply for any of these funding streams because we're still finishing that application. So once it is online next Wednesday, then when providers go to that tab, they'll be able to start applying for funding. So, so that's our deadline to get that out. The next two are ones that I would like some, I think, probably ongoing feedback and conversation about. So what we had talked about and have right now on our timeline is September 15th as the deadline for providers to submit funding applications, and then September 30th for funding decisions to be made. Now, there's kind of some pros and cons to having some, I guess, these deadlines on a call, on this similar call that I've mentioned that we were on yesterday. That one was actually this same conversation, except for the councils who have already been part of the CCAP pilot, because a lot of this information that we've just gone over, they're a lot more familiar with because they've just done it for 6 months. But so one of the things that they were pointing out is that for Race to the Top, they wanted to have some more discussion about the timeline, specifically with the September 15th deadline and the requirement that sites be level 2. And so we definitely want to make sure we're talking about that. But one thing that it would be fantastic about having a unified set of deadlines for all well, a few things that would be fantastic about having a unified set of deadlines for all councils. Number one, it would make my life a lot easier, because I would be able to train and support, ECCLA would be able to train and support councils who are all doing the same kinds of things and learning the same kinds of things at the same time. So if everybody's kind of moving through this process as a group, that makes my life way easier. Additionally, I think it helps with reporting for ourselves, certainly for the state, for budgeting, for it helps us make sure that it would help for you all to, if you need to do budget modifications, those would all be going through at the same time. Somebody pointed out yesterday it would help the state do all their budgeting for their QI spending at the same time. So more thoughts on that, please? Do these line up with deadlines we already have?
Sarah, are these quarterly deadlines, or is this the one-off deadline for the fiscal year?
This is for the year.
Oh.
Yeah, that would be very challenging for Douglas County. We're just beginning to get everybody in line to complete their level 2, and that's going to, I thought we had the full fiscal year to really work on this quality improvement plan, and to have to have a deadline of September 15th is going to be very challenging in Douglas County.
I'll echo that with Bright Futures in San Miguel, Uray, Montrose, and Delta counties.
All right.
And this is Vanjie in Montelores, and I would echo that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, same for Boulder. I would think the earliest, other than the odd application coming through, I think the earliest I'm looking at is next year.
Okay.
You know,
Okay. Oh, and I see some chats coming through too. So I also just want to point out, and it definitely sounds like this is worth some more conversation. And I think we may have some time set aside at the next ECCLA meeting for. Anyway. So anyway, sorry. I'm going to stop thinking out loud and just say, I'm hearing you say that it sounds like there's room for some more conversation about this. And I also just want to point out, though, that if you're, like, for example, it was at Danielle that was just talking about getting into next year and potentially a drawback if I'm understanding the timelines for these funding appropriately. So in order to be eligible for Race to the Top funding, the site would have to have that level 2. So if they didn't get level 2 until next year, then, and I'm assuming you mean next calendar year, but maybe then they could apply for Race to the Top. And then whatever dollars they got assigned, kind of the longer that application process takes, the shorter their spending window is going to be, which I know with the CCAP pilot, it seemed like that was obviously a very, very accelerated program, but during the outreach and the sites working on their Colorado Shrines application and getting up to level 2 and everything, that felt very, very kind of fast-paced, and how is everybody going to get all their sites through in time? But then once all the applications were submitted and the MOUs were signed, and we kind of felt like, ooh, that's over, then it became this even more rushed thing of, oh my gosh, how are we going to work with them in a thoughtful and meaningful way to spend this money, because that window was really pretty short as well. So I think that's one of the other considerations on the other side of that deadline. Does anybody have thoughts on that? Am I understanding that correctly for the Race to the Top funding?
Well, the Race to the Top funding, oh, this isn't working.
I think you probably have, are you on the phone or on your speaker on your computer? Oh. Did Lucinda just hang up? Oh no, she's still in line.
We had a teleconference this morning with Lucinda, and she was having the same problem with that echoing. And she wasn't really sure what was causing it, and so that's probably why she logged off. But I guess what I would say, Sarah, for me, is that I understand what you're saying, that it's a fine balance between when you get the applications in and when you actually give the funding, so that there's enough time to use the funds before the money's supposed to be used up. But I think my point to you is that September 15th, for those of us that are just beginning this process, is just way too early. Like for me, even if you had a date of January 15th, then I would work really, really hard to get out in my community, to give them that deadline, and to say we need to get these applications in and done. And then as they were happening, we could pull some of the funds. But I just, September 15th is just, I mean, literally a couple months away. So.
All right.
It's a couple months away, and a lot of us are just sure how the system even works and haven't really gotten any formal training. So just don't feel like it's setting us up for success.
Okay. All right. And then actually a piece of good news is that that Sugar is set up to be able to handle this either way. So the way the funding streams are set up in the database, as I mentioned, each of you will have a funding stream in Sugar corresponding to each of these funding sources that you work with. And the deadline, that's where the deadline actually lives in the Sugar database. So we, from a technical standpoint, could set the deadlines all over the place, but from kind of a functional standpoint, I think it might be good, and again, I'd like to have more conversation with everybody else and see if everybody else feels the same way or not. But it seems like it would be nice to kind of have something like some unified deadlines if we can collectively come up with what those would be.
Sarah, this is Danielle. I don't think that this is a Sugar issue or an issue about the setting, working with its technology, but I think there's a misunderstanding between the state officers that have designed the flow of the monies and the reality of working on the ground and building local capacity to get providers to this point. The design of the way, like a September 15th deadline, it seems to me like this is something that's probably going to work pretty well about 3 years from now. The state probably just needs to shift a lot more funds into capacity building and outreach for a period of time. So that's just my opinion. I think that's probably what we're dealing with.
All right. And I'm not actually at all sure that this deadline came from them, from the state. It may have. I'm not sure where it came from. I have it now. So I'm finishing making a note. And okay, we will talk about that some more later. Thanks. Okay, and so I wanted to continue here. So the last thing that I want to cover today, I'm pretty sure this is the last slide, is just some really immediate next steps. So one thing that I'm going to be sending out probably this afternoon, maybe by Monday morning, is a request to everybody for a couple of key pieces of information that I'm going to need to get your funding set up in the database properly. And so like, for example, I want to know who is going to be your MOU signer. Also, if you have any additional MOU signers, things like ITQA, your county, the DHS is maybe an additional signer on that. So any of that information I'll need to collect, and that's so we can set up Sugar correctly to send the MOUs, for electronic signature, to the right people in the right order. And then I'll also want to put in kind of who the main contact is going to be for the quality improvement dollars being spent, and we can change this at any time. So if your staffing changes or if you just change your mind, we can make changes, but I want to know kind of who the main contacts are for these different kinds of resources, and we'll set that in Sugar. And what that's going to do is set up Sugar so that as different things happen throughout this process, so somebody submits an application or somebody submits a request down the road to spend money, things like that, this will control kind of which person at your council is notified of those changes. So these are things that, from a technical standpoint, you could set these up in Sugar yourself. You could change these in Sugar yourself. What I think we're going to do for this round is I'm going to set all these up for you, because I don't think that that's a training priority for us right now. So instead of having all of you set up all these funding streams in Sugar yourself, I'm just going to collect some of these details that I need, and then I'll get all those in the database for you. So keep an eye out for that email from me. And then on I mentioned we're aiming for the 15th. It's looking good. The funding application going live online. And at that point, you can start directing people to it, of course. And then also in the next couple of business days, actually, I already sent out a survey, but so thanks to a handful of you who I know already filled that out. We are going to be looking to get out to those of you that we can in person and come around the state and do some more in-depth and some actual Sugar training. So please check out that survey. I just sent out a link, I think, earlier today. And so we're targeting, hopefully delivering as many of those as possible by the end of this month. And then I'll keep doing online ones as well for either people who can't make it to in-person trainings, and also because these online ones can be recorded, which is nice. So I know some of you are or may be hiring, especially as we're supporting more and more providers and more dollars. So your new staff will have recordings that they can check out in addition to the in-person trainings. And then we'll also need you all to look over some of these documents and pieces related to these different funding streams. So I mentioned already, we'll want you to look over the MOUs and just make sure it's something that's going to work for you, or we'll work out something if you need a custom agreement, something like that. We do have the capacity to do that. And then we have the capability to do that. We'll see. If everybody needs their own MOU for everything, we might not have the capacity to do that. And then a coaching readiness assessment document, we'll talk about that more later. And then that is all around, again, this process that we've been talking about today, which is really getting the providers and you all through this first phase, which is getting the providers through Colorado Shines, getting their funding applications submitted. You all review the funding applications and getting those MOUs sent out, so kind of activating those resources. So this first phase, these are the next steps related to that. As we're gearing up for these, here at ECCLA, we're also going to be working on the planning for the phase after that, which is actually using those resources. So actually, from a Sugar standpoint, logging the coaching hours, recording the quality improvement spending, things like that. So let me make sure, I'm pretty sure, yes, that was my last slide, the end. So any other questions, anything I haven't covered? I'm going to wait another minute because every time I do a GoToMeeting and I ask if there's any questions, and nobody asks any questions, and I think we're done, then somebody chats in a question. So I'm going to wait another minute in case somebody is typing a really long question right now. All right, well, if that is it, then we're done. And oh, almost exactly on time. So thank you very much. Have a good weekend. Happy Friday, everybody. Talk to you later.